Thank you for joining this live event. We will record it and then you can hear it on Spotify or any other platform on my podcast, Let's Date. After the conference, it's like a digital giveaway. And in my podcast, I invite people who transform their institutions with courage and awareness and creativity. And today I'm very happy to introduce you three outstanding personalities, and all of you set new standards in their specific area of competence. You overcome barriers in digital educations, and you all three have a multinational background. Please feel also encouraged to ask questions to my guests, and then you're also joining the podcast. I would like to start with Professor Carlos Delgado Kloos. He's a full professor in Universitat Carlos III de Madrid. His research interest is education technology. He does many researches in all kinds of areas, like regional, national, European, and also on the intercontinental level. You also hold an UNESCO chair. I'm very curious what that is. And you are promoting micro-credentials in Spain, as you think this is the key technology for the future in higher education. On my left-hand side, it's Aleksandra Zhivkovikj. She's a project officer for the European Quality Assurance Register for Higher Education, also known as EQA. You set European standards for the Bologna process to harmonize the Bologna process, and you also are responsible for the database of EQA, which is called DQA, also with a D like database, with over 80,000 reports. Navin Vasudev is the program manager at the South African Qualifications Authority. You came here for the conference from South Africa, far away, and you are a cross-cultural facilitator in many different areas like health, gender, integration, and education. And your new project is about to give access to refugees and asylum seekers to universities and the job market. I would like to start with Aleksandra. Let's make it a little bit personal. We heard so many science, and behind every micro-credential is a faith, a personal faith. And I would like to know what personally connects you three with micro-credentialed or credential in higher education. You come originally from Northern Macedonia. Do you also have a history or a story that you would like to share with us, how it was for you, for the recognition of your diploma when you left Northern Macedonia?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I did my studies in Macedonia in law. So I did my bachelor's and my first master degree in law in Macedonia, and then I continued my education for the Erasmus master program with the cohort of 4 universities: the Autonomous University of Barcelona, University of Oslo, University of Amsterdam, and University of Malta in 2017. So in regards to the recognition of my qualifications and diploma, I don't have any juicy story, to be honest. Like, it went very smooth. So, frankly speaking, like, my diplomas from the university, even though we are not part of the EU, my diploma and my qualifications were recognized. However, one of the main issues was related to presenting the diploma in the original version. So practically I had to present my diploma, the original diploma, to the university in the leading of the consortia, which was the Autonomous University of Barcelona at the time. And that was a bit of an issue because different universities, in my case, the diploma does not come right away. The physical paper diploma does not come right away after we graduate, but it takes some time to be issued. So for me, it was a bit of a challenge to present my original diploma to the university in Spain, simply because I didn't have the paper version of it. the diploma was issued several years. I had to have a lot of conversations with the university administration back home to get the diploma a bit faster than usual. But I guess that throughout the discussions here, we will find out that paperless diplomas can solve issues like I had back in 2017. So yeah, that's one. And I just want to reflect on another thing, on the recognition of the qualifications. I think that, as I said, my country is not part of the EU, but because we are part of the Bologna family, we are part of the European higher educational area, my qualifications were swiftly recognized because there is a mutual agreement and mutual understanding on the European credit transfer system, on the levels of education and so on. So it was easy in that regard because of the Bologna process in first place.
So this is a very good bridge to the next question I wanted to ask you, because you put a lot of effort to explain me how you work. It was for the beginning I had to I followed every word you said. So it's the Bologna stakeholder who defines standards and guidelines to synchronize, to harmonize the process for higher education in Europe and beyond. And then you have ICWAR, who takes these guidelines and standards.
Yes.
And then you have the quality assurance agencies who are registered by ICWAR. Yeah. And these agencies, they register universities that follow the same standards and guidelines. Yes. So it's a little bit, it's like a chain.
It is an ecosystem.
It's an ecosystem and family. So can you make it a little bit more transparent for me? What are certain values that you would like to highlight? Or can you make also an example or name a use case where we can see this value that goes from the Bologna stakeholders to the universities?
I think that that's a very good question, and it is absolutely a complex structure, I have to say. So for many of the people which are not in the Bologna bubble, there are a lot of questions like, what is it that you exactly do and how do you do it? So it's a very legit question. To simplify it, the Bologna Declaration was signed by ministers of education in the late 90s. The European higher educational area was formed, which is geographically larger than the European Union, like, as I said, geographically wise. As one of the products of the Bologna process, there is something called European standards and guidelines, which are guidelines created by 4 main groups of stakeholders. So 4 representative organizations: the network of quality assurance agencies, ENCA, the network of student unions, ESSO, the network of universities, EUA, University European Association, and Eurassia, which is the network of professional higher education institutions, agreed on commonly agreed rules. I mean, rules is a too heavy word, but guidelines on how quality assurance will be done in each of the systems. And the ministers agreed that indeed in all of the countries we will use the same standards and guidelines. The question of values is very interesting because currently we are going through a process of reconsidering whether we need to reevaluate the guidelines and standards. So in 2000, these standards and guidelines were created in 2005, revised in 2015, and now we are in a new process in which we discuss whether there is something that we need to do differently. And actually in the core of the discussion is whether we should also look into values, whether when a quality assurance agency reviews a university should also look into different set of values and whether they're fulfilled or not. But the current version also has a set of values which sometimes are not so visible for people, because usually quality assurance can be a bit perceived by a very technical ticking boxes type of tool. You will hear this a lot, especially from universities which are doing this for a long time, and sometimes they are in a circle of fatigueness of doing this repetitive. But indeed there are values which are in the current version of the European standards and guidelines. So one example would be inclusion of stakeholders. So the European standards and guidelines require that different stakeholders are involved in the panels that visit the universities, with a very big accent on students. So there is a demand that in panels that visit universities and within the universities that do self-reflection processes, the voices of the students need to be included. Further, that students should also be involved in the decision-making processes within the quality assurance agency. So within the governance, you need to introduce different voices. Another value, which is in the current version of the standards and guidelines, is the transparency of the process. So we need to have clear rules on how the quality assurance is done, and which will enable us to believe that if we apply the same rules in a similar context, we will have a same result, that there won't be arbitrariness of the results, whether one institution gets or does not get an accreditation. Transparency also in the results, that after a quality assurance process is done, we have a report. That report needs to be public. The public needs to see what's written in that report, how the institution needs to be evaluated, and so on. Then there is a value in regards to independence. So this is something that also as ECAR we pay a lot of attention to. So we look into whether agencies have third-party influence in their work. And when I say third-party influence, it can be an influence coming from the government, from the ministry. It can be from the private sector or a specific stakeholder. And this is a value that has a lot of meaning with the quality assurance family. So these are just some examples. We can dwell further if you want in the interview. But these are some examples of how some values are promoted through the European standards and guidelines and practiced by the quality assurance agencies and further the higher educational institutions.
What I like about these values are, these are all values like transparency, including the user perspective of the students, that are very helpful for the digitalization process. That's why I wanted to know this very specific. Thank you so much. I would like to come to Carlos. You are actually half German. Half Spanish, and you studied at the Technical University of Munich and in Passau. Do you also have a personal story about credentials?
I had studied first telecommunications engineering, electrical engineering, a 5-year degree in Spain. And with this finished studies, I went to Germany, to Munich. And I did a master's in computer science, and I also got my PhD in Munich. So I registered there, and in order to have the studies, the master's studies and the PhD studies recognized, I needed to present my diploma. The problem was that in Spain, you don't get the diploma after you finish your studies. You get some other, you know this very well, you get some other paper, which to all effects in Spain is equivalent. So I went to this functionaire there, Herr Bachmann, I remember very well, Herr Bachmann. He was there. My office was right above him, so I could see him there. Now I went to Herr Bachmann, and these are the papers which are valid in Spain, which is equivalent to the diploma, but they cannot give me the diploma right now. And he said, okay, this might be equivalent in Spain, but not in Germany. Come with the diploma. Okay, fortunately, I did a lot of, I went to the German embassy in Madrid, to the ministry, and this was in September, in November when I started. Fortunately, when I came back after Christmas, I got my diploma. So in just a couple of months, I had made many interactions, and I got my diploma. So, okay, Mr. Bachmann was very happy then. and okay, now you are officially registered, etc. You can continue to study, etc. But there was a friend of mine. He was an architect. And the same, he went to Mr. Bachmann and showed me the diploma. I I went to the Spanish consulate in Munich, and they delivered also an official statement that this is equivalent to all effects in Spain. So my friend also, was not so lucky in getting the diploma, so he continued his master's in architecture, and after 2 years, he went to Mr. Bachmann, okay, I finished my studies, and yeah, but there's no diploma, so you don't get an official degree. So he was not so lucky, no? So this last century, of course, is many years ago, but this was the situation we had for official recognitions across countries, no? And this is not reasonable that it still exists today.
That's why we're here. And that's why we're here to talk about solutions that are more reasonable. And save a lot of energy and a lot of time for students to really have a worldwide student journey that is convenient for them. You have invented a CDK approach, which by coincidence are the first letters of your names, but just by coincidence. So it's it's K for digital knowledge, D for digital diploma, and C for digital community networking. I found that so interesting. Would you like to share this approach with the audience?
I think, what does a student get out after visiting a university for several years? And the idea is that basically three things. No? And in order not to remember, not to forget about it, I took the initials of my CDK, Carlos Delgado Kloos. No? One is the K, knowledge. Knowledge is something, it's maybe the most important, but it's not the only one. Because you can get knowledge on the Wikipedia. You can study everything on Wikipedia, you get the knowledge. It's a very important thing, but it's not the only one. The other thing is the diploma. So the signaling to the outside that you have finished your studies and that entitles you to pursue a profession or continue studies. No? So this is the second thing. And the third one is the C, which is the community, the networking, the friends you make for life, the connections you make, and the way of being also. No? Sometimes the students get into the university, they look all alike, but when a computer scientist gets out of the university, this set of thinking of doing is completely different from a lawyer, for instance, no? Because it's all these other intangibles that are transmitted through to the teaching for the professors. No? And so CDK, community, diplomas, and knowledge. Now, with digitalization, I think we have experienced the last decades or more than that, the digitalization of knowledge, no? With the MOOCs, for instance, MOOCs, edX, Coursera, etc. So we have been experiencing a fast digitalization of content. We are right now living the digitalization of the credential, of the diploma, and we have seen many approaches, many presentations. We also in Spain, I can talk about it later if you wish, one of the approaches we are pursuing. And the most difficult thing is the C, the community. I think we are still there in early times. Maybe it will take another 10 years to really digitize this well. No? We have seen here a presentation about 3D worlds, no? This virtual reality. Maybe, I'm not sure whether this will be the final way of digitalization of the interpersonal communications. I think it's too early to say so, no? But we're at different stages for these three things. I think knowledge, right now, it's a commodity, can be got from whatever. Now we're experiencing the digitalization of the credential, which is very important, and maybe in 10 years or whatever time, we will see how these interpersonal communications can be digitalized as well, or not. No? So.
In 2 years, we're here for the next conference, maybe on the topic of communication and networking. You say the importance of micro-credentials is essential for the future. So today, universities have to make certain decisions. And you also talk about the challenges of different ways how to make these decisions. Could you please say something about this and how you solve that in Spain, maybe?
Yeah, in Spain, I'm presently leading an initiative called 30 Digital, 30 Digital, Certifications Digital.es, where we are 23 universities. It's European money that has come through the ministry and arrived at the universities, where we intend to provide a service for all the Spanish university system to provide digital credentials in the future. And the approach we have taken is on the two main European initiatives. One is EDC, European Digital Credentials for Learning, from DG Employment, with Europass, etc. So we have launched now the tender, and we are selecting the company to develop the software to integrate what has been developed by European Commission, no? This online credential builder, etc., into the practices of the university. Because what is there is good, is available, but it needs to be integrated into the student information systems and make practical for a big university really to be able to launch this credential. So this is the first thing we are doing there. And the other one, because this is easier, and the second one, and the agenda will be coming out the end of this year or beginning next year, is about using EPSI, the European Blockchain Services Infrastructure. We have heard here also some presentations. So, which has major implications also in terms of the identity of the students, etc. So this is the second step. So the decision we have taken European initiatives. We're starting with a simpler one, where you can use existing identity mechanisms and taking advantage of what has been developed by the European Commission. And then the second one will be to use the blockchain approach for next year. So this is the project we have in Spain in order to put Spain, the Spanish university system, into the digital credentials era.
We will talk about that later. Okay. Now I would like to introduce Navin. We're waiting for 25 minutes to talk to each other. I already introduced you that you come from India, worked in Canada, now you work in South Africa, and now you have this project where you help asylum seekers and refugees to start a new life, even if they don't have their diploma with them. This is really challenging. And you are also honored in the, I have to read this, TAAD Hall of Acclaim 2022. Maybe you tell us what that is.
Okay.
What was the most important thing for you to integrate in the job market and also in the maybe academic market when you had to go to a different country?
Interesting question. I have to think about it, Dorit. Well, I was born in India, and circumstances were such. I did part of my schooling in India and Iraq because my father was posted in Iraq, and so I moved between Iraq and India, and it was at a very young age that I actually began to interact with the whole issue of what does displacement mean. At that time, of course, I didn't understand that. It was just Dad's friends. We would go to Mosul. If some people know about Iraq, we would go to Mosul or Basra, and Dad used to talk about the displaced people from Kurdistan coming to Mosul or Basra. At a very young age, these things used to come into my mind. And I went back to India to finish my schooling. And then, again, it wasn't planned. In some ways, it wasn't planned, but in other ways, it was. But I moved to the UK to study, had my education there, fell in love, and went to Canada and started making my life there. And then came to South Africa for 2 years. I came to work for an organization which was more humanitarian-based development work. It suited the work and my own psyche. And one of the areas of interest for me has always been migrants, displacement, issues around prejudice and discrimination. Those are issues that have always been important to me, how to address it. So I came to South Africa for that 2 years, and 20 years later, I am still in South Africa. I love the country, and this is home. South Africa is home for me. But I'm also working in an environment where I'm dealing with issues around the things I love, passionate about, challenging, of course, in many ways at a personal level too. But again, it's something I'm passionate. And I think I'm positive enough to think that if one can make a difference in some people's lives, that is more than important. And I think that is really something that is really important to me. When we talk about digitalization, those are mediums to make people's lives better, to bring peace. Somebody at the beginning talked about, how do you better the environment? So the question is, are these the tools to use? How can we better these tools? And in a small way, this project that we are doing, working towards the recognition of qualifications of refugees and asylum seekers, tries to attempt that. We are not just focusing on recognition, which is very important, recognition of qualifications. We're trying to go a little further. We're talking about, we try and work towards building tools or methodologies to recognize qualifications of refugees, particularly those who are missing their qualifications, their transcripts. You spoke about, certain documents that are missing, but we're not stopping there. What we are trying to do is moving towards accessibility. So if you have that recognition and using the tools, your qualification gets recognized, does it lead to access to employability, or if you choose further studies? So this project, it's a small project. It's a testing of, whether this works or not. But I think, hopefully, I'm hopeful, I'm positive, as I am always, so that we would at least have some answers towards that.
What I found very powerful is this crossover combination of these three topics, like higher education, integration, digitalization, and you just mix it together as if it's the easiest thing in the world. I love that. It's very powerful. You're very passionate about it, and it's a very high purpose that you have. And you were thinking about something like a digital wallet that refugees or asylum seekers could carry with them to have their diploma with them, so they don't have to look up for paperwork, but maybe you explain it to us.
Yeah, so right now, because the project began, we are collaborating with an organization called the World Education Services, based in North America, but we're also being led by the government, the South African government, the work at the continental level in Africa. Some of you may know some of the conventions, like the ADIS convention. You talked about the Bologna. Mm-hmm. So in Africa, there is the ADIS Convention, and there's a very specific clause that talks about how can we work with displaced people in the continent. So this particular project, the driver to that is the ADIS Convention. Some of you are familiar with the South African qualifications framework, which again looks at issues around. I know, Samir, you talked about it on the first day. The painful history of South Africa, how it has, what the context is, and Dr. Adams, you've spoken about it, but we're looking at all those areas, looking at the drivers, and to see how that defines this particular project. So in the year one, there is the focus on recognition. In the year two, we're looking at the issues around accessibility. But while this is being done, we are also the founder members of the Groningen Declaration, and there is an attempt to create what they're calling a global wallet, an open source wallet, and it's still in its infancy, and it's to think through how this is going to be done, so that a person, wherever they are, and if they plan to move to whichever country, that technology will be able to help these persons to move their documents from one place to the other, because our experience has showed that particularly with paper documentation, there are difficulties. There are, when we're doing this project, and we use the interview method, so we're talking to the people, we know their context, their histories. This is not a file, this is not a number, this is a person, and that is very important. For us to understand, and that the whole area of whether we can create a wallet which will help in this mobility of people who are, we're talking about, people who are forced to move from wherever their countries, wherever their homes are. We're hoping that we can bring all this together in a small way, and hopefully, if things work out, we will try and see if we can scale up. But I think the learning is at so many levels. We're talking about technical learning. We're talking about learning to open our minds, to think differently, changing the attitude of people, ourselves. By myself, while doing this work, it has changing the values that we talk about. So I think there are different types of learning that is affected by this. The previous presenter talked about, lifelong and life-wide learning that can take place. So there are many big hopes. I'm being very ambitious here, but we've got to start from ideas, and I think this is one of them.
Let's catch up this idea, Carlos. If you would have your e-wallet with you, it would haven't been a problem for the recognition. What must university do, for instance, if we just follow this idea a little bit in our mind in the future, to have such a system with electronic wallets? Is that realistic?
I think we are still far away from this vision. Right now, we have the European initiatives, EDC, EPSI. Then there's IMS Global with One EdTech. IMS Global has been renamed as One EdTech with open badges, and then they have the candidate recommendation 3.0. But when you talk to One EdTech, okay, this is going on in Europe. Okay, no, you should follow our standards. It's 800 companies which are behind One EdTech, IMS Global. So the power of standards, we are the standard, no? But so I think at the highest level, there's still a lot of talking to one another, necessary, and the different interests of the different companies and the different countries and the governments, I think we're still, it's good that the conversations are starting, but there's still a lot of different ways of doing the same thing, and still a lot of work needs to be done. Maybe the several standards and formats should coexist, but to have a way to interoperability is necessary, is what is needed. Yeah.
Could the work from ICWAR be like a role model for such a future, or I don't know, to build up in the future standards for these processes of recognition, credibilities?
Okay, just to reflect first on what Professor Kloos said, I think that in these settings, often when we talk with universities, I think that one of the primary questions is how to make the university leadership understand that this should be priority. So it is a case when we exchange information and talk informally that in not all universities in Europe, in the European context, digitalization is a priority, because the leadership has so many things to think about, to do, limited time, limited resources, that making a far-fetched plans and long-term planning can be a challenge sometimes. So I think that one of the primary challenges is not the digitalization itself, but how to make it a priority for the people that need to put the stamp and the signature on the document that says let's go with it. And then comes the planning and so on. So I think that that's one challenge. On the question of whether the work of, let's say, the Bologna organizations in regards to the standards can be a role model, I think that there's several reflections here. I wouldn't say that the European model it's the best model. That's a very Eurocentric way of thinking. But I think that there are some, it is a kind of a successful story, because compared to other regions in the world, the European higher educational system is the most synchronized or more harmonized comparing to the other regions. And there are several reasons why that is the case. So in some of the previous sessions, some of the presenters said that Europeans are very good in making contracts and agreeing between each other. And I think that the first step is making this non-binding soft law type of agreements in which governments agree on common standards. And the Bologna Declaration is an example for that. So I think that that's the first step in which in one place policymakers come and they agree that they will do the things. together in the future in a synchronized way. But there are also other factors, I think, that can be related to the success of the Bologna in some way. Bologna has an organizational structure that pushes for the changes. So it has a secretariat. Every few months, the presidency changes depending on who is there. Different countries take the leadership, so they organize the meetings and so on. So there is an organizational structure in the background that makes sure that the processes are running. And through this organizational structure, a community is born and maintained. So within the Bologna structure, you will see people that are there for 20 years, and they're there since the very beginning. And it's a very strong community in which people share the same values, they develop a common language and understanding, they communicate in a formal but also a lot of informal ways, and they push for the changes to happen. Another thing is the sense of ownership. I think that's why at the beginning I mentioned that the European standards and guidelines, which are related to the Bologna process, are product of the stakeholders. So it is not an initiative led by one stakeholder or one country. There's several actors that are involved, and they feel the sense of ownership and belonging within the idea and the values that have been created together. And last but not least, I think that in the case of the European initiatives, a very important factor is that there is a financial support in the background. So there is a lot of the governments, are supporting projects related to Bologna. Bologna initiatives, Bologna changes, and so on. There is the European Commission, which the Erasmus programs and so on, which have a big budgets that promote some of the Bologna-related ideas. So these are like 4 or 5 factors that contribute towards the success. Okay, it can be debated, of course, but like to the success that Bologna has achieved in the past 15, 20 years. Whether this can be a role model on a global level, I think that it's a very difficult question. And I think that the answer should not come from Brussels or from the organizations which have euros, that are based in Europe. I think that the answer, maybe Navin or someone else in the audience can reflect on whether this model would be accepted and whether it makes sense in the other parts of the world. Yeah, that's my opinion.
Yeah, I think for me, the whole idea of collaboration and partnerships are really important. Professor Carlos, you talked about, the whole area of community it's a difficult concept. And I think the whole area of learning, we need to relook at what do we mean by when we talking about learning? And this morning I heard about the concept of unlearning. And I think those are areas that we really need to look at. How can we build partnerships? How can we listen to each other? Whether it is the North, whether it is the South, whether it is within the North or whether it is within the South. But we can only move ahead if we can learn from each other. I love platforms like this because we're listening to each other. We are trying to see what works, what doesn't. And in some way, we're all speaking the same language. And it doesn't matter which region and which continent. So I know it sounds a little out there, but I think that is the reality that we have to move towards. We have to listen what are the interesting examples around the world. Within Africa, which I'm more familiar with, there's excellent examples of work being done in West Africa, which people don't realize what's going on, or whether it's East Africa or some things that are happening in South Africa. So we need to create those platforms. And I think that's where technology can play such an important role to reach out to each other. And I think that is what might be the way to make a change in how we live and making a change in people's lives. I go back to this making a change in people's lives, because that is why we are all here, what we want to do.
And it's also a question of mindset, and as you said, of ownership, which is the first level of cooperation. It's to feel responsible, not only responsible, but really to own the process. And what do you think, Navin, is important when you when you work with asylum seekers and refugees, and you say they need something like a digital wallet or whatever, so their diploma is recognized, but sometimes the new country has not the possibilities, not the high standards that the refugees have. We have this phenomenon in Germany these days, because especially Ukraine people, they have higher standards in digitalization in their country, and than we have. I think they have e-marriage and e-baby. This is not what we have. E-baby. I heard that. I hope it's. I heard it's true. But it's very easy to digitalize these processes, and you don't have to wait for an appointment at the authorities. What do you think? What criteria do have national authorities fulfill that they can be on one level with refugees or asylum seekers that come from very high standard countries in digitalization?
Yeah, I think, Dorit, I mean, you raise a very important point, because it touches upon this whole area of stereotypes, of what we think. The moment we think of a refugee, we have this category of or an understanding that this is what a refugee is like. This is what an asylum seeker is like. And most often than not, it is far from the reality of what it is. And these stereotypes is what tends to create the whole issue of prejudice, because there is prejudice, discrimination, you know, all forms of homophobia. Dr. Adams, you talked about Afrophobia, and I must say that it is quite an interesting, you know, in South Africa we talked about xenophobia as such. There is this whole area of that we need to consider. I think it goes back to the whole area of changing mindsets. And I must say, in the work that we are doing at SACWA, the work we're doing, this little project that we're doing on refugees, is actually influencing the way we look at recognition of qualifications overall, because we have a policy, a process on the recognition of qualifications in South Africa. And I must say, like in SACWA, unlike many other countries, the whole recognition process is not advisory in nature. It is a decision. It's a legal standing it has. But even so, the work that is we are trying and testing these new models and processes is influencing that model that we use in South Africa to recognize qualifications. But I think what is important is, again, the openness that we have the flexibility to be able to say, okay, this is an important learning can it actually change the way our everyday function is? And that is not easy. It's easier to sit here and say that I'm privileged. I have that authority to say it there, but the realities can be a little bit different. But I think those are the areas, I think it goes back to the values, which can actually result in some understanding of a standard approach of looking at issues that we are facing, whatever that could be. It could be displacement, but even so, that's there. Yeah.
And you mentioned we need more platforms to learn from each other, like also to learn how the African countries do it.
Absolutely, and that's why I'm very thankful, in fact, to be sitting here, to be able sharing these learnings, to learn from the rest of the audience here. I think that is really important, and it's what platforms are already there, what platforms can be created, how can technology help it? And I know there's been so much talk about, because it allows a cheaper, probably, way to reach out to people around the world. So those are the things that needs to be looked at. And I think that is where our investment should go into, because then you're reaching out to, you may not be able to reach out to everybody, but you're reaching out to a sizable number of people.
So we had what you mentioned, Aleksandra, was the mindset, but you also mentioned the structure. I would like to go back to Carlos. How could such a structure, I mean, I think maybe we didn't even really start before the starting point, or we'd already started, I don't know. How could such an infrastructure, if we try to reach that goal, how does this infrastructure has to be built in? You say you work in a regional, in a national, European, and international context. It's a very big question.
Difficult question.
Yes.
Maybe going back to the CDK,
Yes.
we need more C. We need more like places like here, no, where we talk and because even if there's a technological perfect solution, this might not be the ideal solution, no. So we need to have ways of communicating, of understanding each other, even if we speak the same language. The understanding behind the words are sometimes different for different people, no? So we have to go through and understand each other more. So have a lot of places for reflection, for communication, for understanding. These points about credentials have so many applications in so many different fields, because it's employment, it's studies, so there are different views about it and how it should be solved, no? So you need to put all stakeholders together, and even then maybe experiment and try again. So it's a matter of time also to have maybe failed approaches and start again. So I think it's a difficult process. Technology and everything changes so fast that you have to be continuously understanding what is going on. And I think this is one of the difficulties. Aleksandra mentioned also, no, that you have to have the senior management of a university really understand the problem. But it's so difficult to understand because so many things are changing at the same time. What was valid yesterday is not valid today anymore, no? So it's very difficult to grasp really what are the possibilities, what are the implications inside and outside, no? So we are living in a very changing environment, and I think the only way to solve is to try and experiment and fail and talk to one another in order to advance. The important thing is that there's a positive vector of advancement, not going back, no? I don't know what to these difficult questions I've
I love this topic, you know why? Because I'm German, and Germans have the federalism, and we also have very different solutions in one country.
Yeah, yeah.
And every solution is well formed, and yes, there are many people who like that solution, and then comes another technology, and then we have to change, and so we have this discussion going on all the time. It's a little bit like maybe the European discussion or the worldwide discussion, if it would be so organized, I don't know. And for me, it's very important, how do other people try to reach a common goal for standards? Of course, it's easy to say we would like to have standards, but it's not possible, of course, because we have many solutions that work very well. So how do we deal with this multiplication of different approaches which have the same goal but are very, very different? So I'm very interested in your opinion about this. From now on, let's say 6 years. It's not the next, not the conference after that, but the conference after that. We are here. Kathleen is inviting us for the next 3 conferences. And let's say I'm very interested. What would you say? Where do we stand there? Would you like to begin, Carlos?
Where do we stand?
Yes.
Well, we are at the beginning of an important revolution. We will see. Last year we started this conversation, and one thing is, I mean, the government discussions and the official discussions maybe go slow, but what pushes us is the private, the LinkedIn's and the Amazon and the Google certificates. No, things are going on there, even if it's in walled gardens. No, the credentials from Amazon only work in Amazon, on Google, on Cisco, whatever. No, but they're doing it. No, and LinkedIn is also advancing. We heard it today. No, so I think this is also an example that things are possible. Of course, it's much more difficult, no, to work in the world, in the wide world, no, than if it's in within one company, no. So I think we are setting the start of something which will be very important, very relevant, and very useful for all the stakeholders, for students, for employers, and for lifelong learning.
Thank you. Aleksandra.
That's a very difficult question. I would like to see more connected. I mean, I'm expected to see more connected. I mean, I know that the word interoperability flies a lot in the discussions, but I really wish that there is a improved interoperability between different initiatives, because now we can see, okay, we have the European initiatives, we have initiatives taking place on national level, in some countries even on regional level, depending on the political organization. And I wish that sometimes some of these regional and national initiatives look a bit with one eye on what's happening on the other side, and have in mind the already existing systems and trends that are happening beyond the national borders. Because too many standards is not good. We eventually need to agree on what is it important for all of us, but also to let go sometimes, you know, something that we find super important, but for the others is not. We need to be open to making more compromises. So I would like to see a bit less ego, to be honest, in making this standard and more agreed structures between the countries and between different initiatives. I hope that that will happen in a few years from now. Yeah.
If I let go something else, it's easier if I know that I can catch up to something else. So this is like a transmission point where I let go and I catch up. So how can we help different stakeholders to let go? This is a very common question in Germany.
Yeah.
Yeah. Navin.
I've just been thinking thank God I was the last one, so it's easier to, because I've been thinking. But I was...
I told you I will challenge you with this podcast.
I was just thinking, I remember in my university days when Alvin Toffler, I think it was Alvin Toffler, and you know, he talks about the world of the future, and he talks about the world of the future as the world of learning, but more important, the world of unlearning. And I think that is really something very important, to let go and to move on. So in that sense, for me, I would call it a 3 eyes. There has to be, I would see 5 years from now, a level of understanding of impact, to understand influence, and to understand innovation. That is something that is very important, because you have to stop and see what is the impact of all the work that we are doing. And then, because it's not a question of showcasing is important, but it is important to look at what is the evidence of the work that is good or bad, doesn't matter, but it is to understand impact, to use and find tools to be able to measure impact. And I think that is really important. The area of influence is something, just being in the work that I do, the area of influence is really important. The ability to negotiate, influence policymakers, people sometimes who are resistant to change. That is an important area, and what tools that one can use, or what methodologies that one uses to actually influence communities, policymakers, politicians. That is an area that is very important. And of course, there's ongoing innovation that is continuously to be shared. And I think that is what I would like to see in the next 4 or 5 years, in a platform like this being talked about.
Thank you so much. I think we have another 5 minutes, but I would like to summarize our podcast. Maybe it's nice to finish earlier, isn't it? Sometimes. For me, I leave this conversation very filled with inspirations of where we are developing in higher education, also in its infrastructure, that we need more conferences and more platforms like this, thanks to DAAD, to TU München, and to the Hasso-Plattner Institute for this podcast. And that we also need less ego when we let go. Ego is a very important thing. Thank you for mentioning this. I know it's not easy, but this is a very, very important thing, and we have to learn it. And what I liked about your idea is to measure impact. So this is very easy. If you say this technology has less impact than this technology, it's objective. It's not.
But it's also,
how can you measure it?
I mean, there are two aspects: power and business. No, so if you control standards, it's power. No, and it's also business for companies. No, we have heard digitary, no, parchment. No, so it is their business model. No, so it's not so easy. It's not so easy.
It's not easy.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Carlos, Aleksandra, and Navin.
Thank you.
Thank you to Kathleen, I cut this out, to Kathleen Clancy for this live podcast idea. This was yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you.